Well, when I was in college at Baylor, one of my favorite classes I took there was a class called Conflict and Communication. It was a really fun class. Dr. Blair Browning taught it, and I liked it because it was super practical, because conflict is everywhere, right? Conflict's everywhere. Like if I'm going to know somebody, or if I'm going to be known by anyone, well, there's probably conflict that's inevitably going to come. And naturally, as humans, we don't deal with conflict well, right? Some of you guys know, like, I am an avoider. I do not like confronting things. I don't like when people ask me questions. And so people just don't like conflict because we don't know how to handle it well. But going through the class, and also just the more and more I think we live life, we realize conflict's actually a gift. Conflict is a gift because in applying pressure to relationships or applying pressure to yourself or anything, what happens then is your love for that thing or that person is tested. Your love is tested, and ultimately, if you make it through, you end up strengthening your love and refining your love, and I would say, as a Christian, we end up learning more about the love that God has for us in pushing through that conflict. So I'm not going to ask you, again, you don't need to raise hands. Maybe your community group leader will ask you that this week, but think of a conflict maybe that you've recently had, or maybe currently have. Maybe it's unresolved now. It could be with a family member, it could be your spouse, it could be a kid, it could be your parent as you're preparing to figure out how Thanksgiving and Christmas are going to go. It could be with a coworker or a neighbor. I mean, it could even be with a fellow church member here in this room. And so if you think of them, you think of that conflict or that tense or whatever, that unspoken thing that just creates tension between y'all, obviously you love them. That's why it bothers you. And so what I want to ask you to think about is how willing or how far, to what extent are you willing to go for them? At what point are you just like, I don't know if it's worth it anymore. Like, I know I should love them. I say that I love them, but it's hard. It's hard to continue to love them. It's hard to continue to be patient. It's hard to confront them when I don't feel like I want to. Conflict is testing your love. Conflict is testing your love right there. And so as we look at this passage, I think that question, like, how do we love when it's hard? Because it's easy to love lovable people, right? It's easy. Like, when you're nice to me, it's very easy for me to love you. When you're not nice to me, that's when it's hard to love. So I think when we look at this passage this morning, what we see is, like, at this point in the Joseph narrative, we are getting near, like, the climax of the story. All right, next week when Josh preaches from chapter 45, you'll see Joseph just breaks and he just kind of spills all the beans, and that's kind of where the resolution starts to happen in this final, like, episode of Genesis. But this is kind of the last conflict building up to this. And it's super tense. And what's weird is it actually contains the longest speech in the book of Genesis. Now, again, I've mentioned this before about Hebrew literature, but in narratives, there's not a lot of, like, if someone talks, it's very short and it's just to communicate something, and then that's it. A lot of the emphasis is on the action, not on the words. But we find the longest speech here, which is odd, but I think that's to get our attention, not only to slow us down, understand what he's saying, but understand the why, but, like, what is he saying behind this speech? What's he saying behind this speech? And I think ultimately in Judah, we see what unconditional love looks like, what it looks like to love when conflict comes and it's really testing, like, how much do we actually love someone? This is one thing to say we love people, right? I tell people all the time, I love you, I love you, I love you. I love hamburgers, I love pizza, I love, like, when Baylor wins a game. Like, there are lots of things I love, but obviously my love for, like, teenagers walking a ball down a field is different than a love I might have for my spouse or a kid, right? And so when conflict tests our love, what does that look like? And in Genesis 44, I think we see three expressions of unconditional love. The first one's found in the first 17 verses. So this is everything leading up to Judah's speech. So in verse 1 to 5, we basically, I'm not going to reread everything, but I'll kind of just summarize what Leroy just read. So in verse 1 to 5, Joseph tests his brothers. And he gives them a similar test to what we saw a couple weeks ago. So if you remember, there's a famine in the land. The brothers have come, and these are the brothers that 20 years earlier sold Joseph into slavery because they didn't like that dad liked him the most. So here they are in a famine coming back to Joseph, who was smart enough to store up and be able to provide for people through this famine. And so Joseph says, hey, put the grain back in their sacks again, give them their money back again, but I want you to do something different this time. Take my silver cup, which is probably like my favorite coffee mug, but probably a little bit more expensive and significant, and put it in the sack of the youngest brother that they didn't come with the first time. Put it in his sack. And then what I want you to do, and he told the steward this, he said, just wait a little bit, and then I want you to go run after them and confront them about it. So he hatches this plan. And so in verse 6, the steward does exactly that, and he confronts them, and then in verse 7 and 8, what happens? The brothers, they're outraged. They're almost offended. They're like, whoa, okay, if any of us did that, like, he deserves to die, and the rest of us will all be your slaves. And the steward's like, no, that's not at all what, like, chill. Just that one guy, whoever did it, if any of y'all did it, I'll take him back, he'll be the slave, and the rest of y'all can go innocent. So they say, all right, that's fair. So in verse 11, they start opening the sacks one by one, with the oldest all the way down to the youngest. And in verse 12, what do we find? Where's the sack but in the last one you open? In Benjamin's sack, the youngest, the one brother that the dad was like, if he dies, that's the end of it for me. I'm going to die of a broken heart. And so then it's just, all right, well, Benjamin's got to go back. He's got to now be a slave to Joseph. And the brothers at that moment are free to go on their merry way back to their dad. But in verse 13, they do something kind of unexpected, something that we probably didn't expect these brothers to do, knowing how they've acted in the past. Look at verse 13. They tore their clothes, all of them. Like all of them were emotionally distressed. They all empathize with him. They all grieve, and then all of them load up their stuff, and they're like, well, I guess we're going back to Egypt then with Benjamin. We're not going back to dad. I mean, this is where we see the first expression of love. So if you want to know what does unconditional look like, well, first, love commits. Love commits. We see that in the first 17 verses. And when I say love, I know a lot of times we sing about love, or I know we're starting to get into like the Hallmark Christmas movie season. Love is just this weird feeling that, when the guy from the big city walks in and you just, I'm caught up in this emotion. No, like love is an action here. Like, yes, they're emotional. They feel emotions here, right? Like they grieve, they tear their clothes. They're distraught over this. But love actually causes them to act. Even though they're good to leave, they don't. They say, no, we love our brother, and our love for our brother is going to cause us to stay with him. We're going to commit to him. We're not passively standing around going, well, let's hope for the best. No, they're actively committing to their brother. And what I love here is that Judah is like resolved on making things right. If you look at the paragraph from verse 14 all the way down to 17 and then even on into 18, Judah's the one leading the way. Judah's the one doing all the talking. I mean, it says here in verse 14, when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house. Now, the way you would normally read the story is, well, Benjamin's the one in trouble. So you would think it would say, when Benjamin and all the brothers showed up at the house, but Judah's the one leading the way here. And when he's questioned, like all the brothers are questioned, there's 11 of them, who's the one that speaks up? It's Judah. It's Judah. He's not being passive. And we find out in his speech, he's motivated by the love that he has for his dad, the love that he has for his brother Benjamin. And Joseph asks this really fascinating question in verse 15. It's a question that we've all heard before. If you've been with us in the book of Genesis, this is the 8th time that you've heard this question. He says, what have you done? That's the Hebrew expression, mazoth asith. Okay, mazoth asith. And this is the 8th and final time that this is used in the book of Genesis. If you guys remember back to the Garden of Eden, when everything was perfect, and then the serpent tempted Adam and Eve, and they ate of the fruit, and sin entered the world, God came and he confronted Adam and Eve and said, of the fruit, what have you done? Do you remember what they did? The devil made me do it. They blamed the serpent. And then the next chapter, their kids. Cain killed his brother, and God said, Mazoth Asith, what have you done? And how does Cain respond? He starts complaining to God. Fast forward a few more generations, in chapter 12, Pharaoh confronts Abraham about lying, about Sarah being his sister. And how does he respond? What have you done? He just leaves, doesn't even answer, just walks away. And then a couple years later, Abimelech accused Abraham of the same thing, lying about Sarah being his sister. And what does he do? He tries to rationalize. He says, well, here's like my thinking behind why I lied. And then, oddly, Abraham's son does the same thing to another Abimelech a few years later. He also lied about his wife being his sister. And when confronted, he just, deer in headlights, totally silent, doesn't say a thing. Then his son, Jacob, was deceived by Laban. Like on the wedding night, got wives switched out right there. And he confronts Laban. He says, what is this that you've done? And Laban gives excuses. Well, in our culture, here's what happens, right? I have to give my older one away before I give away my younger one. And then a couple years later, Jacob leaves and he deceives Laban, and Laban confronts him with the same question, what have you done? And he counter-accuses him. So what we see 7 times throughout the book of Genesis, this question, what have you done, is being asked over and over and over again, and 7 times people respond poorly. It's the wrong answer. It's the wrong answer. And on the 8th time that this question, what have you done, is asked, it's actually answered right. And think about this. This is Judah, he's the one, it was his idea to sell Joseph, who was the favorite son, for silver. And now he's being asked about Joseph's silver cup found in the sack of the new favorite son. So this is coming full circle here. Like beyond all the irony of this is the first time that question, what have you done, is answered rightly in the book of Genesis. Look at what he does in verse 18. Judah went up to him. Verse 16. Verse 16. We're not at verse 18 yet. Verse 16. Judah owns his sin. He owns his sin. He says, God has found the guilt of your servants. He says, we are guilty men. We are sinners. And then what he does, and this is fascinating, he seeks to make it right. He says, how can we clear ourselves? How can we make things right? Hey, we're your servants. We are at your disposal. What do you need from us? We want to make this right. Those are words that we use in theological circles called confession. That's owning your sin, saying, yeah, I did that. And atonement, making things right. Something's wrong, we need to fix it. How do we make it right? Well, that's atonement. And so sin must be confessed, and something must be done to make it right. To make it right. So do you see then the commitment of Judah? He understands things are wrong, and the going gets tough. And even though he's good to leave, he doesn't leave. He stays. He commits, even though he could have left. And that's where I'm like, reading this story, I just came to that part where I'm like, so many times, like when things get hard, especially when I'm free to go, and it's like, okay, Michael, but do you actually love this person? Are you going to stick it out with them, right? Like when we love somebody, we don't leave when things get hard. That's not what unconditional love does. Yeah, but Michael, I have biblical grounds for leaving. Okay? Like, Michael, I'm the only one here trying to save this. I'm the only, I keep working and working and working, and I'm patient and I'm waiting, and I'm like, yes, okay, we can talk about that, but we know true love that in the gospel of Jesus Christ, like the greatest love never leaves us or forsakes us, no matter what, ever. Like there is nothing we could do that even the things that God would be justified in just saying, you know what, you're on your own now. Nothing will ever be able to separate us from his love, ever. Nothing. Love bears all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That's what the love of God does. So that's the first expression of love, right? It commits, it seeks to make things right, but the second we find in Judah's speech. Let me start with verse 18. Judah went up to him and said, "Oh, my Lord, please let your servant," that's Judah, "speak a word in my Lord's ears. Let not your anger burn against your servant, for you're like Pharaoh himself." Judah humbly comes up to Joseph, basically just trying to make an appeal for his brother. Say, hey, will you just hear me out? And what we see in his speech is that love puts others first. It's the second thing about love. So it commits, but it also puts others first. It puts others first. Look at the various ways in Judah's speech that he humbly puts other people first. In verse 18, he begins with a humble appeal on behalf of his brother. He's not the guilty one. He's seeking the best interest of his brother. This is what sometimes we call intercession. Intercession. It's appealing on behalf of someone else. It's intercession. And what Judah's trying to do is he's seeking to turn away the wrath or the anger of the sovereign ruler that's justly due. And so he realizes as he's coming then, which is why he humbly says, hey, I'm not going to yell at you in your face. Let me just talk to your ear. He's coming to him and he's saying, this could cost me my life, but I'm willing to do this for my brother. I'm willing to intercede for my brother. And I don't know if you picked up on this when Leroy was reading this, but in this speech, the word father is used 7 times. 7 times. Now, I don't get into all the numerology. What does 7 mean? It means that he says it a lot, right? He says father a lot. And what does that reveal about his heart is that he's seeking to please his father. I mean, look at how much he loves his father. He understands that his father, Jacob, loves Benjamin and that it's now his favorite son. And 20 years ago, the way that he responded to his father's favoritism was to sell them into slavery. But look here, it's not in spite of Jacob's favoritism that he steps up for Benjamin, but it's actually because he's like, Dad loves Benjamin. I can't, that's going to compel me to step up and potentially lose my life. It's out of the love, his dad loves Benjamin, and that's what compels him to step forward. And on top of that, I think there's a lot of humility we see here because Judah, he's obviously not driven out of love for himself or out of his own gain like he was back in chapter 37, but here he's actually driven by love for his dad, which he says father a bunch, love for his brother. He never insists on his own way. This is what's really, really, really fascinating. Judah never refers to himself by his own name in this speech. The only word that's used more than father in this speech is servant. He always constantly keeps referring to himself, not as Judah, not as his brother. No, it's, hey, I'm your servant. I mean, understand the humility there. The humility. And what I also love is when he's telling the story, he's just stating the facts. He's saying, look, this is the situation. I'm working to my solution. We'll get there in verse 33. But let me just state the facts. And I don't know about you, but when a parent, when I was a kid, and I was the middle kid, so I loved stirring up trouble. And so when I would always pick on my little brother, and then, he would go M-O-M, and if I didn't stop, then he'd yell, Mom. And then, my mom would come in, and she knew I probably caused it. And so she would ask me, okay, Michael, what happened? You're the older one. Tell me what happened. And I would go, okay, how can I frame this in a way? I know I'm guilty, but how can I try to make it where I'm not as guilty or he's equally as guilty, right? There is that temptation in all of us to retell events where we look better than we do. Or maybe even go, well, actually, it's all his fault, and here's what you should do to reward me for bringing you in. I know that there's these temptations to either twist the narrative or make ourselves look better, but this is what's fascinating about Judah's speech is that not only is he trying to twist the narrative to make himself look good, he's not doing that, but also he doesn't even look for anyone to blame. Judah points no fingers here. He simply just states facts to get to his solution. His love for his dad and his brother, it puts their best interest in mind. Now, you guys might go, yes, Michael, I agree. We should do that. We should put other people first. In the moment, that's a hard thing to do, though. It's easy after the fact to go, okay, here's what I should have done differently. Let me think about this. I'll speak for myself. When conflict comes and tensions rise, it is not my natural instinct to first go, hey, time out. I'm going to use my first of 3 timeouts, and we're going to pray. All right? That's not my natural instinct at all. If I do, maybe it's just okay, Lord, give me patience. I need a lot of it right now. I need a lot of patience right now. I'm not praying for the other person. I'm not praying to, not just patience for them, but I'm not praying to even try to understand where they're coming from. I'm not praying to consider them, and I'm definitely not praying, what would help the other person most in this situation? What would help them? I'm being honest, right? In the heat of the moment, the first words out of my mouth, I am presenting my case. I'm going to put myself in the best light, and if it happens to residually benefit the other person, great. But if so, it's an afterthought, right? So I'm definitely not thinking about them. But then to go beyond that, to just stop and commit to like seek my brother's gain, even if it's at my expense when I'm the one that's innocent. I mean, that's the last thing on my mind. That's the last thing on my mind. But that's exactly what unconditional love does, doesn't it? It considers other people first, and it advocates for their best interest, not necessarily our own. And what's even more, like, Judah's not just blowing smoke here. This is not lip service, okay? He doesn't just go, okay, man, well, it's your fault. Well, I guess I'll just go with you so that Dad doesn't get mad at me, and then I'll just think about, like, oh, well, wish things happened better for Benjamin. That's not what he does. Like, we see at the end of his speech in verse 33, this is like the key verse of the whole chapter. Love is going to require something from him. Love is going to require something from him. Now, if you remember the context, last week when we were in Genesis chapter 43, Jacob, the dad, was reluctant to send Benjamin. He's like, I don't know. I already lost my favorite kid. This is my second favorite kid. Again, parents, don't rank your favorite kids. So he's reluctant to go. And what does Judah do? You remember from last week? What does he do? He stepped up and he said, I'm going to pledge my life over my dead body. This boy's not coming back, right? I will pledge my life that he will return. And last week we heard that and we're like, yeah, that's awesome. What courageous love. And it is. But it's one thing to say that you'll give your life for somebody. It's another thing to actually step up and do it, right? Because this is where the rubber meets the road. Is Judah going to make good on his word? Is he going to make good on his word? Like, this is the climactic moment. His whole speech is building to the therefore that we see in verse 33. Look at what it says. It says, now, therefore, this is his proposal to make things right. Therefore, please let your servant, me, Judah, remain instead of the boy, Benjamin, as a servant to my Lord, you, Joseph, and let the boy Benjamin go back with his brothers. And this is where we see the greatest expression of love. It's that love lays yourself down. Love lays yourself down. This verse right here, like, this is the beauty of the speech. I mean, a lot of us who have grown up in the church, we've heard that verse from John 15, that Jesus says there's no greater love in the world than to lay down your life for somebody else. And that is exactly what we see here. Now again, I'm not putting this on you, I'm just talking about me. Like, committing is tough. Putting other people first is really tough. But laying my life down is so beyond that, sometimes it's even hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. And what I think is more interesting than all of that is it's the people that we love the most that we say, oh, I'll do anything for you. The people we love the most are the people we fight with the most. The people we love the most are the people that we argue with the most. And I'm like, why is that? Because if I say I'm willing to give my life up for you, why doesn't my day-to-day reflect that? Again, I'm really not thinking of any, like, pointing fingers at any of y'all. This is how, when I was meditating on this passage this week, I was thinking about, we all have those arguments where things get heated and we need to go leave the room and aggressively clean dishes, right? We know those. And then when we cool off and we come back in the room, what do? Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. No, I say, well, have you thought about, what I was trying to say, I don't think you're understanding me. And then I just open the thing back and it just spills everywhere. We do that. We start it all over again. Maybe not to win the argument, but just go, okay, I'm going to forgive you, but first you just hear me out, all right? I just want you to know and understand where I'm coming from. And millennials, we really love being like, hey, listen to my story. Listen to me. Just hear me out here, right? Hear me out here. But, like, I feel I'm probably not the only one who says, I'll take a bullet for you, but I can't take a loss in this conversation, right? I mean, seriously. I'm like, I'll say, oh, okay, yeah, of course I'd lay my life down for you, but am I going to lay down my need to be right now? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so when I'm reading this passage then, and I'm thinking like, man, Judah, this is like the expression of love. This is unconditional love that we see in the gospel. And I'm going, okay, I can do this, all right? Things get hard, stand by them, seek their best interest, lay my life down. I can do that. Before we look at this passage and go, yeah, we can be Judah, I think we first need to look at my life and go, am I willing to lay down my freedoms for the sake of somebody else? I mean, I'm not even talking about life and death here. Am I willing to lay down my wants for somebody else? Am I willing to lay down my pride for somebody else? Am I willing to lay down my need to be right or heard in this conversation for the sake of somebody else? Am I willing to do those little things? Because if I can't do that, there's no way I'm actually going to lay down my life when it comes to that moment. If I can't lay down these little things, and again, guys, this is easier said than done. That's why I walk through all the what have you dones. I mean, over and over and over, everyone has just answered this poorly. You go, well, Judah's a special man. Remember chapter 38? There are far more righteous men in Genesis rather than Judah. But yet, this is the first time in the Bible that somebody steps forward and offers themselves as a sacrifice. The first time in the Bible. And more than that, Judah's entire story comes full circle here. I want you to notice this. Like last week we talked about this, where Judah pledged himself for Benjamin, which kind of reversed his pledge for a prostitute in chapter 38. But there's another bigger, grander reversal going on here in the story of Genesis. If you remember, back to chapter 37, Judah was the one that suggested selling Joseph, the favorite son, into slavery. For what? 20 pieces of silver. And now, Judah's looking at this situation unfold before him. The other favorite son, Benjamin, now has what kind of cup in his bag? A silver one. A silver cup in his bag. And what's wild, the man who insisted on selling the favorite son into slavery, he says, hey, give me that cup. I'll become the slave. Give me that cup. I will become the slave. Like, he knew and realized in that moment, whoever was found with the cup is going to face punishment. He knew that. He knew something's wrong. Joseph didn't have his cup, somebody else did. And whoever has it, they're going to get the wrath of Joseph. Like, something has to be done to make things right. Somebody had to pay the punishment. And Judah could have just gone his merry way and say, you know what, Benjamin? Sorry, maybe you grabbed the wrong sack, but that's your problem now. But that's not what he does. Instead, he takes Benjamin's punishment so that he could give him his freedom. Do you understand that exchange? He takes the cup. He didn't know if Benjamin stole this or not. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that the cup was planted. He doesn't really know whose fault this was. All that mattered to him was that there was cup at the bottom of the wrath, or there was wrath at the bottom of that cup, and somebody had to drink it. And he said, no, I'm not going to let my brother do that. I'll drink it. I'll drink every last cup. Like, that's how much he loved his dad. That's how much he cared for his brother, and he wanted his brother to be free. Friends, there's no greater love in the world than this. There's no greater love in the world than this. And this is the way that Jesus loves us. This is the same way if you remember what happened before Jesus went to the cross. The night before Jesus died, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And what did he do? He was about to be punished for our sins. And he went before the Father to make a plea, much like verse 18. He went before the Father to make a plea. And what did he pray? He said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. I know you're powerful. That's what Judah says here. Hey, you got the same power as Pharaoh. Like, you can do whatever you want. God, Abba, Father, I know all things are possible for you. So remove this cup from me. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. You remember that from Mark 14. I mean, this is like, just like Judah in Genesis 44, Jesus intercedes and he takes the cup of wrath so that his brothers could go free. That's exactly what Jesus does here. And what's even wild, on top of all of that, what happens right after Jesus prayed the third time? A man named Judas came and sold him for 30 pieces of silver. And off Jesus went. Like, not for his sins. Remember that. Like, it was for your sake, for my sake, that Jesus went to the cross. It was for your sake that he went to the cross. He endured the cross. He despised the shame. Why? So that you could go free. So that you could be forgiven. So that you didn't have to face the wrath associated with that cup. Like, he drank every last drop of wrath from God's cup for your sins, for my sins. He didn't have to do that. Remember, imagine Golgotha. Jesus is hanging there on the cross, dying, not for his sin. Like, he's the one guy in the right in that whole situation. Everyone else is guilty. Again, if this were me, I would be like, guys, do you understand what I'm doing for you? You're wrong, I'm right. Why are you doing this? That's how I would try to make things right. I would at least, even if I went through with it, I would at least let them know what they're doing. And what does Jesus say on the cross? He says the opposite. He says, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. They know not what they do. This is the greatest love. So, does Judah love his brother? Absolutely. But Judah is just a foretaste of what we have in Christ. Like, Jesus took your place. He was punished for your sin on your cross so that you could go forgiven, so that you could go free, and so that you could go be with your Father forever. Jesus did that for you. If you've never heard that before, like my plea for you, my prayer for you, my hope for you today, tomorrow, for the rest of your life is to turn to him. Don't wait. Don't just go, that's great, Michael. Not for me. There is nothing else I want for you more than to turn to Jesus and just receive, enjoy, and just sit in what he's done for you. Abide in him. And friends, if we have believed this, what happens is when we believe in Jesus, his love so fills our hearts that it just spills out into our lives. It so fills our heart and it spills out, and then we can love other people the same way. Again, when we read the story of Judah, we're like, we cannot do this on our own. We definitely cannot do it on our own. I can't love other people on my own. I can't appease my father on my own. Definitely can't fix conflict in my life on my own. I definitely can't fix my relationship with the Lord on my own. There's a lot of things I cannot do on my own. In fact, there's almost nothing I can do on my own. But thanks be to God that not only has he saved us, but he's given us his love. We now are able to do what we couldn't do. And so if God's love can transform our hearts, our loveless hearts, a broken relationship is a piece of cake. If he can take our dead hearts that want nothing to do with him, what can't God's love? This is the greatest love in the world. And so my hope and prayer for you this morning is I want you to know this love. Not know about it. It's fine, right? We can do Bible studies, we can read books. I want you to experience, to know, and to enjoy this love. Enjoy this love. Come to Christ, bring your sins, bring your shortcomings, bring everything you are, lay them at the foot of the cross, and then lay yourself right beside it. And just say, Lord, I am nothing without your love. I lay myself down because Jesus laid himself down for us. And friends, when you experience this love, you will not do it, you won't be able to help but love in the same way that you've been loved. Let me pray for us this morning.